Talk to me.
Information, news, and entertainment on demand.
WSRadio.com.
Welcome, neighbors, to Vecinos with your host, Maria Garcia.
Welcome to Vecinos, our last program for the 2017 year. My guest today is Jimmy Patino, Assistant Professor for the Department of Chicano Latino Studies at the University of Minnesota, among his many titles. My reason for having Jimmy on our show is to discuss a book he wrote, Raza Si, Migra No, Chicano Movement Struggles for Immigrant Rights in San Diego. We will discuss the book in great detail, but before that, I would like to welcome Jimmy and ask him to talk about the road he took for this book. Jimmy, thank you for being my guest. Will you please share with us and our listeners about your childhood and growing up in Houston, Texas? Tell us about your family.
Good morning, Maria. Thank you so much for having me. I'm born and raised in Houston, Texas. Several generations in Texas. I think it's important to say that, what inspired me to be a historian are the stories that my grandparents and my parents told me about them coming of age throughout the century in Texas. It was really important to hear those stories and also important to not so much hear those stories in school, which, led for me to become a historian, to tell those stories and to infuse our popular narratives about those stories. Some of those stories include my grandfather, Charles Patino, who grew up in Houston during the Jim Crow era, during segregation, surviving and thriving through that process. He served in the Navy in World War II, came home to a continued segregated society, but built his family, worked hard to give us the opportunities that we have today. Similarly, my grandmother, Julia Patino, also worked as a seamstress, as a tailor, and survived different struggles in that context to also nurture us and help us grow and our family grow and be safe and whatnot. So, those are just really important experiences I had. I would also add that their stories gave me meaning in terms of navigating my childhood in the 1980s and 90s. We moved just outside Houston, and in a not as diverse kind of area of town. I ran into struggles with local police, with kind of criminalizing youth of color at the time, and their stories helped me navigate those and make sense of those issues that we confronted, and helped me make sense of kind of the tensions that existed growing up that I wasn't able to intellectualize as a youth, but in retrospect, having the opportunity to go to college and get some intellectual tools to make sense of the tensions, really led me to the beginning of career as an academic, as a professor, as a writer, and led me to writing this book.
Can you tell us about your family? And were you a mischievous little boy? What kind of a student were you? Just who is Jimmy, the little boy, not the young man now?
Jimmy, the little boy. I think I was very shy, very reserved, but also I think very inquisitive. I learned I read a lot. My mother took me to the library a lot, where I would read about all kinds of things, from dinosaurs to space to really at an early age, I guess 10 or 11, which is how old my daughter is right now. I began reading about history and stories about Mexico and the history there. So I think I was a reserved boy, and very much in my head, reading and thinking about things. I think I was a pretty good student in that regard. That's what I can remember.
You talked about confronting or confrontations with the police. Did you personally have this experience?
I did. By the time I got into high school, the school I went to was majority kind of white students and with a minority of black and brown students. And I think, it was the early 90s. I think there were larger concerns, and this is all in retrospect. I didn't fully grasp this while I was experiencing it, but, there was concerns about gangs and, crime and youth. And because of our day-to-day experience, and I say our, kind of the black and brown kind of kids that were in that school, tensions with with white students, and that got interpreted, I think, as that we were criminalized, I think, by the police. So just hanging out with friends at the movies, often the police would approach us and sometimes search us. Sometimes, I remember one moment when they asked us to leave. It was a smaller town outside of Houston, and they asked us to leave the town, basically. So these experiences were, made us angry, I think. And, I grew up listening to hip-hop and rap music, and that, kind of participating in that youth culture was a way that we rebelled in some ways, and a way I began thinking intellectually about, why we were being treated in this manner. So yeah, all those experiences, build on how I understand things today.
Something that caught my eye, and I think you've already answered it, was you dedicated the book to Luna Bella, your mom and dad, Jimmy the Third, your grandparents, and familia. Can you share a little bit more about the reason for that dedication?
Absolutely. So Luna Bella and Jimmy the Third are my kids.
Right.
Jimmy's 13, Luna Bella is 11. And really, Luna Bella was born the year I began doing research on this book.
Okay.
I didn't in 2006. I didn't know it was going to be a book then. It was a seminar paper at that point. So her life and my son's life have been, parallel to when I was writing this book, and all the struggles and difficulties and joys as well that go into writing a book. So I really wanted to dedicate it to them because their whole life is, they sacrificed a little bit in terms of when I wasn't present, when I was writing the book, when I was in my head a lot thinking about the book. And so I really wanted to thank them for, their patience with me and the time that they allowed Dad to work on this. Also to show them that, they are fully capable of doing whatever it is that they want to do. This is a dream of mine to tell these stories and, use them to engage the social world we live in and try to suggest some solutions to make it better, especially for them. So that's why I dedicated it to Luna Bella and Jimmy. Of course, my parents and my grandparents, again,
yes,
beyond raising me and loving me and nurturing me, also inspired me with the way I saw them struggle to take care of their families, work hard, and tell me those stories about the family and, again, inspiring me to write the book. And my broader family, just, I've come to appreciate the day-to-day life that we had in terms of spending time together. My grandmother making tortillas in the kitchen and making good food, my dad or grandfather barbecuing and just laughing and being together. Those are, I think, the, basis of community, and family, and that allow us to go out in the world and do the things that we do. And I also dedicated it to mi gente. I think I put mi gente or my community in the book.
You did.
And I I'm glad you asked that, just because I, not only to the Mexican American community, but when I say mi gente too, another part I grew up in Houston is it's multiracial. And so when I say mi gente, I mean, black, brown, yellow, red, all the folks I grew up with, all the intersections, all the different cultures that meld together to make Houston what it is. I mean it in that way too, and I hope that comes through in the book as well, that the struggles of Latinas and Latinos are always interconnected with the struggles of our African-American brothers and sisters and other folks of color. So that's what I meant by that.
That was very evident in the book. You spoke a great deal about the similarities. Instead of, you didn't focus on the differences, but more on the similarities, which is, as a humanity, we do have more in common. We are going to go to commercial in a few minutes, but when we come back, I'd like you to talk a little bit. You've written so many articles about Chicano Mexican Americans, and is there any particular reason why you chose this theme? And we'll expand on that after the commercial. But if you could start, we have about 20 seconds, which I know is not much time.
Okay.
So can you tell me a little bit why you chose this topic?
Well, I think the Chicano experience, the Mexican-American experience, I think is...
Sorry, we're going to commercial. We'll come back.
Okay.
Hold that thought.
Thank you.
A podcast or radio show on WS Radio is a great way to create content marketing. Turn prospects into customers into raving fans. Contact Wade at WSRadio.com or call 866-WS-RADIO.
The richness of your life is reflected in the shimmering elegance found at Diolun Design. One-of-a-kind jewelry and pieces from Cynthia Dillon in silver and gold help to express your unique personality. The flowing designs of her creations will empower the way you move throughout your day. Join us online at DIOLUNdesigns.com.
Hi, this is Rob Barnett, CEO and founder of VinVillage.com and the Wine and Dine Show on Vin Village Radio. Do you have a wine, event, product, or service to promote? Then contact VinVillage.com to reach thousands of wine lovers across the country. VinVillage connects like-minded wine enthusiasts with unique and exclusive wines, events, products, and services. To learn more, contact us on VinVillage.com. VinVillage is where wine lovers connect.
One person has the power to change the world, impact millions of lives, and leave a legacy for lifetimes to come. That person is you. In the New York Times bestseller, What is Your What? Steve Olsher, award-winning author and founder of the Reinvention Workshop, reveals his proven process that has helped thousands of men and women discover, share, and monetize the one thing they were born to do. Grab your free copy now at www.whatisyourwhat.com/free. That's www.whatisyourwhat.com/free.
Take a break from politics. Tune in and learn something. WS Radio shows are worth your time and are filled with tips and advice. Add us to your lunch routine and we'll give you a meal for your mind.
Small businesses are the lifeblood of America's economy. Every Thursday, SBA Radio interviews industry professionals and is dedicated to provide small businesses with timely insights and innovations. Visit www.sbaradio.us for details.
Has your business been appified? Are you tired of doing marketing that doesn't deliver results? Mobile apps build loyalty and quality retention. Your app from UPG Mobile puts your business on their mind and at their fingertips. UPG Mobile will give you a custom app highlighting how you are unique, targeting your message, and improving your open rates. Appify your business and amplify your presence with your customers at upgmobilemarketinggroup.com.
Talk to me.
Information, news, and entertainment on demand.
WSRadio.com.
Welcome, neighbors, to Vecinos with your host, Maria Garcia.
Welcome back to Vecinos. As I said before, my guest is Jimmy Patino. Jimmy, I asked you about why you chose to write so much about Chicanos and Mexican Americans and the process, but I realized when we were in commercial, I didn't ask you, when did you know you were going to college and what made you go to college?
So, I feel like I almost always knew I was going to college, and I have to credit my mother, Linda Patino, for that. She told me I was going to college, and it wasn't an option whether I had to not go to college.
Good.
So, right, I remember that humorously now, but I did what Mama said. So I went to college. It was a process to find what I wanted to study in college. Initially, I was, instructed to do something where I could make enough money to help the family out. So I went from a business major initially to I wanted to write and I wanted to engage the social world. Like I said, I had been thinking about that. So I was a journalism major for a little while. And finally landed in sociology. I got a BA in sociology from the University of Houston. I took a lot of classes in Mexican-American studies there. I minored in history, which is, of course, what I ended up getting my PhD in history. The history and ethnic studies and sociology were just spaces where I could think about, again, this context that I came from, where I noticed these tensions around race and other categories, and also was inspired by the stories of folks who struggled and who resisted those circumstances. And I wanted to tell those stories. So
I found your book very interesting for several reasons. One, of course, being that I know most of the people you wrote about in the book.
Right.
But more important than that, it's preserving oral history of the Chicano struggle in San Diego. It covers immigration, La Raza Unida, demonstrations, agreements, sexism, disagreements. It's really about the Chicano civil rights struggle. Why San Diego and why this book?
Great question. I think in some ways, I was in San Diego. So I was in San Diego at the University of California, San Diego for graduate school in the history department from 2005 to 2010. And the project in some ways fell in my lap. Herman Baca, the activist from National City in the San Diego area, had just sold his archive to the University of California, San Diego, and the year that I got there. And I had already interest in Chicano history and began to look at it, and again wrote this seminar paper that grew and became the book. So in some ways it was because I was in San Diego at the time. And I also value very much learning about and rooting myself where I live, right? So I was living in San Diego. My daughter was born in San Diego. And I really remember grounding myself and rooting myself in San Diego through the project, right? I got to meet Herman. My first job in the summer I was there was being an oral historian, recording and interviewing some of the activists that you're friends with, and meeting San Diegans, right? Meeting folks from San Diego and learning about the history there. Herman had arranged and advocated for a condition of selling the archive was to hire an oral historian, which is how I got that job, to supplement the archival, sources with interviews. So, and as I began to learn about San Diego, one, I learned San Diego is understudied, particularly in terms of Mexican American history.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's always in the shadow of Los Angeles, right? Los Angeles probably is the city with the most work in Chicano history.
Right.
But I saw it, and especially with the topic of immigration, right, which was central to, I think, what groups like the Committee on Chicano Rights and other groups were concerned with, San Diego is the place to understand that because it's right at the border. And in many ways, the folks that I interviewed and the voices that I found in the archive were saying what's happening in San Diego in terms of the Border Patrol and other policing kind of institutions harassing and even becoming violent against both Mexican immigrants and Mexican Americans is a warning to the rest of the country what could happen everywhere else. So we need to pay special attention to San Diego. And so I saw that, and I thought that had a lot of relevance, which is another reason why San Diego and why I wanted to write the book and focus on the local conditions of San Diego near the border.
Is there any stories from the book you'd like to share?
Yes, there's many stories that came out. I think one that's kind of fresh in my mind as I look at the title, as I look at the cover of the book. I just was able to spend the weekend with a woman, Yolanda Lopez, who was a Chicana artist who was born and raised in Logan Heights in San Diego. She now resides in the Mission District in the Mission Barrio in San Francisco.
And let me, for those, may I interrupt just for a minute? For those of you that are not familiar with Yolanda's work, the mural at Chicano Park of the Virgen de Guadalupe, kind of a modern version of the Virgen de Guadalupe, is done by Yolanda. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to kind of place. She has a very important role in San Diego history.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and I'm glad you said that because I think that's one story that I hope comes out in the book is the role of women like her who, so on the cover of the book, there's a woman holding a sign that says, "No Vietnamization of San Diego, stop the Carter Plan," and there's kind of barbed wire drawn around the no. And Yolanda designed, I learned that Yolanda designed that that poster. And I think not only is it an important poster, is it something that people carried in the marches protesting the violence coming from the Border Patrol, but also it kind of brought together concepts, it brought together key ideas. The notion that Vietnamization of San Diego was occurring was, highlights how Chicano and Chicana activists resisted and conceptualized and understood the militarization of the U.S.-Mexico border as fundamentally detrimental to Mexican and Mexican-American people, right? And so I think that comes together by evoking the notion of Vietnamization, the idea that it's like a war zone. And the more that you invest kind of a law enforcement solution to the immigration issue, the more that leads to violence among particularly Latinas and Latinos. And I think Yolanda's work helped kind of conceptualize that in artistic form. So the other part of the story is her poster, her very famous poster, "Who's the Illegal Alien Pilgrim?"
Yes.
Which depicts an indigenous man kind of smushing immigration plans and asking who's the illegal alien pilgrim, right? Kind of highlighting how the absurdity around this kind of settler state, this government that has a history in terms of settler colonialism and manifest destiny in, taking land from indigenous and other peoples, and then deciding who's supposed to be here and who's not, and coming up with this concept of illegal alien. That poster was made for the Committee on Chicano Rights as they struggled in the late 70s against new proposals to further militarize the border. So I think it's really important to highlight that story, that she made that poster in relationship to actual on-the-ground struggles to alleviate the community from this violence that was coming from immigration policy.
And it's very appropriate in today's political climate.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, the problem still exists, right? And it's almost common sense, at least in the mainstream media, to tie law enforcement solutions to immigration. And here, I hope one impact the book has is to show an alternative vision that saw law enforcement solutions as, again, detrimental to the Mexican and Mexican-American community, and, imagine something else where that community itself could help create ways to interact with one another at the border rather than imposing this militarized solution.
Again, we're getting close to commercial, but I do, I'm sorry, I do want to speak a little bit about your experiences at UCSD, because we will talk more about it. But tell us about the process of taking these oral history stories, finding the people.
Sure. Again, I was hired as an oral historian with the Special Collections Library at UCSD to supplement the archive with oral history, starting with Herman Baca, who was and continues to be the leader of the Committee on Chicano Rights, and it was his archive that was sold to the university. So it started with him, and I think kind of snowballed from him as he suggested other people, and I met other people associated with the CCR. I will say that the oral history process requires gaining trust, particularly from racialized communities, from minority communities, and from former activists, right? So I remember going to Herman's print shop on my first interview with him, meeting him at National City at Aztec Printing, and ready to interview, but we didn't interview that day. He asked me questions and got to know me, and, you know, I got to know him.
Hold that thought. We'll be back in a minute. Hold that thought. Thank you.
Tired of presentations with no impact, no inspiration, and no traction? Do dull speakers have you and your team disengaged and distracted by smartphones? Christopher McCullough brings energy, insights, and 2 decades of experience, delivered with punch, humor, and heart. Your team will leave energized, uplifted, and with a sense of purpose. Visit ChristopherMcCullough.com to bring some heat to your next speaking engagement. McCulloughe. ChristopherMcCullough.com.
Take a break from politics. Tune in and learn something. WS Radio shows are worth your time and are filled with tips and advice. Add us to your lunch routine, and we'll give you a meal for your mind.
I raised $8,000 to build schools for South African children. After realizing how many people go hungry in San Diego, I now volunteer at a food pantry.
I'm spending the next year doing volunteer projects across 3 countries and helping in ways they designate to be the most helpful.
The World Link program at the Joan B. Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice recognizes the potential of youth as agents of social change. Learn how you can help youth become a generation of leaders in action at peace.sandiego.edu.
Attention business owners. If you feel like your business owns you and want to grow your company and get your life back, then get the Scale Toolkit at scaleyourbusinesstoolkit.com. Created by Wall Street Journal bestselling author David Finkel and Priceline.com co-founder Jeff Hoffman, this free collection of 36 videos and PDF tools will help you build a business, not a job. Go to scaleyourbusinesstoolkit.com today and learn how to work less by getting your business to produce more.
Small businesses are the lifeblood of America's economy. Every Thursday, SBA Radio interviews industry professionals and is dedicated to provide small businesses with timely insights and innovations. Visit www.sbaradio.us for details.
If you heard that sound, you probably are eligible for insurance from Navy Mutual, insuring the men and women of the Navy, Marines, and Coast Guard. Here's what one policyholder, retired Navy Commander Thomas Dade, had to say.
Navy Mutual is the best insurance decision I ever made. I wish you had a savings plan available that earned the rates my Navy Mutual insurance has been earning.
Navy Mutual Aid Association, started by military members in 1879, serves active, reserve, and retired military today. Navy Mutual honors our military by providing them affordable life insurance with the features they need without fine print, sales fees, or military service restrictions. Value, integrity, trust, and stability are the cornerstones on which our commitment to you and your loved ones are built. Call Navy Mutual at 1-800-628-6011 or NavyMutual.org for your personal life insurance plan consultation. 1-800-628-6011 or NavyMutual.org. Navy Mutual, insuring those who serve.
Talk to me.
Information, news, and entertainment on demand.
WSRadio.com.
Welcome, neighbors, to Vecinos with your host, Maria Garcia.
Welcome back to Vecinos. My guest is Jimmy Patino, who is in Houston, Texas, but telling us about a book he wrote, Raza Si, Migra No. When we went to commercial, you were talking about basically how Herman interviewed you before you had a chance to talk to him about oral history. Would you like to continue that, please?
Yes, absolutely, and I think that's a good way to depict it. He interviewed me about, who I was, and I had to, it was important for me to share, who I was, Jimmy from Houston, a graduate student interested in Chicano history, and he wanted to know why. Why are you interested in Chicano history? Why are you interested in doing these kinds of, these oral histories? And, I explained that I think it was important to tell those stories and that they were, important to teach the society about how we got to the point that we're at, particularly in terms of the immigration debate, but more broadly around race issues in the United States. And so, we kind of had a back and forth around that. And I think he really wanted to know what was my politics. Mm-hmm. And, for me to explain that the process of collecting oral histories from a marginalized community is not, a mundane process. It's something that is inherently political because, getting these voices out there challenge the status quo, I think, challenge some of the ways that the world works, challenges some of the hierarchies that exist. And so it was important for me, I think, to say that to him, for us to build a relationship where we could. And we ended up doing 20-plus hours of interview that summer and beyond.
What were some of your favorite stories that came out of those, not only Herman's interviews, but the other interviews? I know you interviewed Roger, Norma, Augie. By the way, I call Augie and Roger Cheech and Chong because when they've been on the radio, it's like a comedy show. Okay. Can you, it is. I lose control of it. I'm not the moderator. They're handling the radio. Can you share some of your favorite stories?
I can. After meeting Herman, Norma Cáceres was a important advocate for the archive. So Herman had put together a committee from the community to, again, always the activist, right, that even the process of transferring the archives to UCSD was political, right, and made sure that there was a committee together, and Norma was a leader in that committee in making sure not only that the archives would be taken care of, but the main issue was that would it still be accessible to the community that it comes from? Universities are notoriously socially distant from, marginalized communities.
Right.
And so, particularly UCSD, which is in a wealthy part of town in La Jolla, very socially distant from places like the South Bay area where these histories come from, which are mostly, Latino and Latino folks. So through that experience, so that was part of the politics too, was how I wanted to contribute to their needs and concerns and think of ways to make more accessible these stories to the community from which they come from. So that was one kind of function of the oral histories. Norma's stories were extremely important, primarily to note how, women in particular contributed to the movement. Looking at the archives themselves, something that I noticed was the lack of women leadership. The women were there, most definitely. I saw them in the pictures and the photos and some of the memories of folks, but in terms of being spokespersons and leaders, it was more difficult to find their voices. So Norma's voice was extremely important in that regard, to highlight the kinds of work that she and other women did, in particular for a group that existed called Casa Justicia, which was it was part of a larger network started by an activist named Bert Corona in Los Angeles. But in San Diego, it played an important function in terms of providing legal and social services to migrants helping them, gain their green cards or gain status if they were able to, among an array of other community kind of needs. And Norma, another woman named Gloria Jean Valderrama, who I think is a friend of yours,
yes, she is,
played an important role in administering the offices and, doing everything, all kinds of important labor to making that function, to making that important space function for migrants to tell their stories, to have their needs concerned, their needs kind of addressed. And so that was very, very important. Norma also told of ways that she was able to, I think some of the men in the group were a bit chauvinistic and
a bit,
and very chauvinistic in some circumstances. And I think so. It was both comical, but also telling the ways that Norma expressed. You're full of it. Like she told some of the men that you're full of it. Like you challenged their kind of pigheadedness in some ways, and showed kind of the struggles of women to both kind of do the work they wanted to do. They wanted to contribute to social justice and to ending racism, right? But also the internal battles that they had to fight in terms of fighting to have their voices heard. And so that was extremely important.
And I think that's really a taboo. People don't want to really discuss it. There was controversy. There was dissent. Women were unhappy because basically if you weren't the girlfriend or the wife of one of the people, as you say in the book, you weren't allowed into some of those meetings. So you were very, I don't know if brave is the correct word, but certainly helpful in bringing that problem forward so we can openly discuss it. Do you want to expand a little bit more on that?
Sure, absolutely. Again, as a historian, it was a problem that women's voices weren't present. And fortunately, there's been a body of work coming from Chicana feminist historians who have documented in other areas, other parts of the country, these struggles that women in the Chicano movement had. And so I was able to, again, a kind of key issue in graduate school was how do we tell these stories about resistance but also complicate them by highlighting the voices of particularly women, the LGBT community, other folks within the community that struggled to have their voices heard within their own communities. Right, so finding Norma's voice, interviewing Yolanda Lopez again and seeing her contributions and her reflections on, it often sounds like you, to get in the circles, decision-making circles, or to be even close to them, you had to be attached to a man sometimes. I heard that several times from several women. And that was a barrier, right? It was expressed that, when making decisions, the men didn't tend to ask the opinions of women. They were seen as an attachment, as a girlfriend, as a wife. And as Yolanda put it, everything that goes with that, which to me I interpret as doing, domestic-type labor or secretarial-type labor or, supportive-type labor. And so that was a consistent problem in the movement at large. And so for us to imagine politics where we can both address racism, the issues with class differences and struggles, and patriarchy and homophobia, we need to highlight these voices because their very experience was confronting the ways that patriarchy, male chauvinism intersected with struggles with racism and class inequality.
And, it's interesting because in South Bay now, I would go out on a limb and say in the Latino community, the majority of those elected officials are women. Okay, and this is in the South Bay area. The guys didn't run for office, but the women did.
Right, and that's extremely important. And I think women who are in the trenches kind of fighting these small battles again of telling the men, you're full of it, step back.
Get out of the way.
I'm not going to put up with this. Like, that enabled, women to get to places like elected office.
So What are your plans for the future? And we are, again, going to commercial in about 2 minutes, but what is the future of this book? What are you planning to do with it?
I like how the book is a conversational piece now, how it evokes important discussions about how we got here in terms of the immigration crisis and where we want to go with it. And I hope the book gives some ideas about some options in terms of particularly dreaming of a world without deportation.
You know, I think that's a lot of our dreams, and it scares me because it seems now it's worse than ever. Your book's been out how many months now?
Oh, it came out in early November, so just about a month.
Okay. So is it being well received? Can you read what's going on with your book?
Yeah, I think it's being well received. It's, again, in the early stages, but my colleagues have been excited about, my colleagues in Chicano history and ethnic studies across the country in many ways have expressed support and are using it in classes, I'm hearing, and so I'm very excited about that. I've had conversations with media, including you, about this, and again, I think it strikes a chord in terms of the crisis that we're in now. I think you're right that the deportation regime, as we call it, as scholars call it, is deepening, right? Deportations and law enforcement as a solution to immigration is so embedded right now and supported by millions of dollars coming from the government.
We'll be back in a minute for our last half. Thank you so much for doing this interview. I'll see you in about 3 minutes.
On the internet, your business's reputation can be unjustly destroyed in an instant. Don't wait for that to happen. Building and marketing your 5-star reputation can increase your business by as much as 19%. Take control of your reputation and have the 5-star reputation you deserve with Reputation Marketing Solutions by DSI Development. Become the go-to company by visiting 5starrepmarketing.com. The number 5starrepmarketing.com.
Hi, this is Rob Barnett, CEO and founder of VinVillage.com and the Wine and Dine Show on Vin Village Radio. Do you have a wine, event, product, or service to promote? Then contact VinVillage.com to reach thousands of wine lovers across the country. Vin Village connects like-minded wine enthusiasts with unique and exclusive wines, events, products, and services. To learn more, contact us on VinVillage.com. Vin Village is where wine lovers connect.
You've heard me talking about Progressive Medical Center. They have helped me feel my best. And Dr. Gully, tell us a little bit about integrative medicine. Why is that such a big deal at Progressive Medical Center, and how can that make me feel better?
Integrative medicine is just good medicine. It's combining the best of traditional medicine, nutritional medicine, natural medicine, and really helping the patient get to the root cause so they can take control of their health and really make an impact to improve not only their energy, their vitality, and just their overall outlook on their health and their life.
I procrastinated for a long time before I finally made an appointment. So why should someone not delay and go ahead and get set up and come see you guys?
Any journey begins with that first step, and that first step means making a decision to recognize that there's something wrong with you. Whether you have fatigue, inappropriate weight gain, not sleeping well, not concentrating, all of these issues, you can get to the root cause.
So many of us here at The Fish have gotten help from Progressive Medical Center. So why don't you find out more from them today? Go to progressivemedicalcenter.com.
This is your life. Live it well.
You take your smartphone almost everywhere you go. Now WSRadio.com can be there too. Search WS Radio in the Play Store for your Android devices or iTunes for Apple and download the WS Radio application. WSRadio.com on your phone and in your ear everywhere you go. Download the WS Radio application. Do it now. It's very easy. WSRadio.com.
Attention business owners. Does it feel like your business owns you? See if you qualify for a free 90-minute business coaching session to help you build a business, not a job. During this free 90-minute strategic consultation, one of our senior coaches will help you map out the best way to grow your company and get your life back. To learn more, go to MauiMasterminds.com/scale now. That's MauiMasterminds.com/scale now.
Talk to me.
Information, news, and entertainment on demand.
WSRadio.com.
Welcome, neighbors, to Vecinos with your host, Maria Garcia.
You're listening to WSRadio.com, the worldwide leader in Internet talk, with my guest today, Jimmy Patino. Jimmy, what else would you like to share about your documentation, and what's next for you in the area of writing or documenting Latino history?
Sure. During the break, I'm in my office at the University of Minnesota here, and I have a poster that Herman Baca gave me it says, "A Time for Resistance to the Chicano National Immigration Conference and Memorial March," which was a conference in March that happened in May of 1980. And in Chapter 8 of my book, which is the last full chapter before the conclusion, I discussed this conference and another a Chicano National Tribunal that occurred in 1981, the following year. And I think what's important about those conferences was that they came to the conclusion that the Border Patrol, the INS, and basically the entire kind of deportation regime needed to be abolished. That was their language, to abolish those entities and start from scratch and do something else. And I think that was a logical conclusion for community organizers who were struggling in seeing the day-to-day harassment, the separation of families, the violence that was occurring as a result of these policies that sought to deport or detain so-called undocumented folks. And so I think that's something I think that we can continue to think about and get outside of the box of, a little bit of amnesty here coupled with more militarization as the kind of solutions that are proposed by our government officials. And so that's an important thing that I learned in the process of writing the book. Oftentimes we hear that the immigration system is broken. What I learned through this research was that it's not broken. It's doing exactly what it was meant to do, which is create a vulnerable and exploitable workforce. And so we have the analytical tools to understand that, and we can use that to try to make change, to try to change things.
Okay. So what are your next plans? What are you planning to write next?
I have a lot of projects on my agenda. So I right now I'm working on the book ends in 1986 with the Immigration Reform and Control Act, which gives amnesty to some people but also continues to militarize the border. So it's this kind of conundrum. And so I want to look at what happened in terms of immigration and kind of grassroots activism between 1986 and 1994 with the implementation of NAFTA, with more bills that further militarize the border. So it's kind of a continuation of the book, but I want to look beyond San Diego and look at other places like the San Francisco Bay Area, Chicago, and Texas to see what was going on there. So that's a project to get us closer to writing a history of how we got more particularly to the present. So that'll inch us a little bit more closely. Another project I want to look at is like before the Chicano movement. The early chapter kind of explores different civil rights and labor organizations in the 1930s that were already criticizing the deportation policies of the immigration system. And I think there's not a lot of work on that, largely because many of these Chicano and Chicano activists, among other activists of color in the 1930s, were accused of being subversive in the 1950s during the McCarthy era. Some of them were affiliated with the Communist Party in the 1930s. Others were just allied with them or were not necessarily in interaction with them. But that was an important entity in the 30s that led to these kind of important critiques. And so I'd like to unearth more of that history, again, in a more national context. see what still exists, what still would survive the 50s McCarthy era, what kind of archival sources survived, and write new narratives about that moment.
Do you have any plans to write about your own community, Houston?
I do, absolutely. My master's thesis was, before I got to this project on San Diego, was on Houston and Black and Latino interactions within hip-hop culture. How hip-hop culture kind of cultivates these critiques of what folks have called the prison-industrial complex, which is a fancy way of saying, the rise of the prison population as a way of, creating solutions to social problems, the way policing particularly affects Latino and African-American communities. And so I'd like to continue. I have some articles on my desk around music and the ways that it issues certain kinds of critiques and shows kind of some of the contradictions in our politics in terms of the inner city, and that's particularly grounded in Houston. And that's where I grew up. That's the music I grew up with. So it's kind of a reflection of my youth as well.
What is something we haven't talked about the book that you would like to mention before we end our conversation? We have about 3 minutes, so take some time and expand on something you really want people to know about your book.
Sure. So I think one thing I'm thinking about is the ways the immigration system intersected with local policing. So there's a chapter in the book that explores the National City Police shot a young man named Luis Tato Rivera in 1975, I believe. And this kind of, I think, revealed how local policing, extrajudicial shootings and whatnot are part of the larger kind of policing society that we've created that's tied to the immigration regime, right? So I know in the current moment, issues of police violence and policing and its relationship to folks of color have very importantly, ascended into the mainstream kind of debates about that. And so it's important for me to highlight that sometimes the immigration struggles and the struggles of folks of color with local police are separated. And this example kind of shows how they intersected, right? Particularly for the Latino and Latina community that has to contend with both kind of systems, so to speak. So that's an important point I wanted to make about one of the key chapters in the book.
Anything else? We have a little bit less than 2 minutes, and it'd be important that this is an opportunity to share anything you want people to know.
So I think I'm trying to think of stories from the book that are important. I think so. One story that comes to mind that I explore in the introduction is how folks like Herman Baca and the Chicano movement even started to think about immigration. I think initially the movement wasn't super concerned with immigration. They were more concerned with authenticating the rights that Mexican Americans already had as citizens. But Herman told me a story about Bert Corona, an elder activist, someone who was an activist in the 1930s, and Chole Alatorre, who was another elder activist from the Los Angeles era, coming down to visit San Diego and basically saying, we got to get on this immigration issue. And Herman's response was, in his head, he was thinking, what are you talking about? How does that have anything to do with us as Chicanos, right?
Right.
And Corona made the point, this is an issue that's going to be with us until 2000, right? So it was very, he was, professing, or he's prophetic in terms of his, here we are 17 years after 2000, and it's still with us. And so, again, why I want to study these activists from the 30s, but also just to show that Baca, paid attention to what the elder activists said and saw in his own community the ways that immigration did affect the experience of Americans of Mexican descent.
Jimmy, thank you.
So that's a key
Thank you
argument
so
from the book.
much. for being on the
so
show.
much, too.
I'll give you a call later today or tomorrow and talk a little bit more about what we talked about. But I very much appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your book, Raza Si, Migra No. Merry Christmas to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria.
A podcast or radio show on WS Radio is a great way to create content marketing. Turn prospects into customers into raving fans. Contact Wade at WSRadio.com or call 866-WS-RADIO.
Kenya Dixon was crowned the #1 sales executive through hard work, deep thinking, and the revelation of universal talk laws. He now wants to share these lessons with you. Universal talk laws are what you need to know and use in business and at home to have successful and effective conversations. Kenya Dixon shares his wisdom, action plans, and wealth. Each book comes with a chance to win $10,000. Find Universal Talk Laws at kenyadixon.com. On the internet, your business's reputation can be unjustly destroyed in an instant. Don't wait for that to happen. Building and marketing your 5-star reputation can increase your business by as much as 19%. Take control of your reputation and have the 5-star reputation you deserve with Reputation Marketing Solutions by DSI Development. Become the go-to company by visiting 5starrepmarketing.com. The number 5starrepmarketing.com.
Hi, Scale listener. This is David Finkel, co-host with Jeff Hoffman of Scale Your Business. I wanted to let you know that our newest book, Scale, was just released and to encourage you to get your copy. The book will give you 7 proven principles to grow your business and get your life back. If you've ever wanted to grow your business, but held yourself back from fear that it would take over your life, then we urge you to get your copy of Scale today. It'll give you a proven roadmap for rapidly growing your business while also gaining more personal freedom. Scale will help you work less by getting your business to produce more. Scale is for every entrepreneur who ever wondered if they really own their business or if their business owns them. Get your copy online or at your local bookseller. For more information, visit us online at scaleyourbusinesstoolkit.com. That's scaleyourbusinesstoolkit.com.
Controversy and conversation to upset the status quo. A no-holds-barred exploration and obliteration of the limits of possibility. Join me, Steve Olsher, and my rambunctious crew on Reinvention Radio, where each week we scour the planet to bring you the world's foremost social, business, political, technology, and scientific disruptors who challenge the accepted and forge daring, cutting-edge paths. That's Reinvention Radio, where normal comes to die and mediocrity meets its final demise.
Hi, this is Rob Barnett, VinVillage.com, where wine lovers connect. Be sure to tune in weekly to Vin Village Radio for exclusive, in-depth interviews with the who's who in wine and food.